Thank you, everyone, for joining us or rejoining us, and especially for your interest in alphabetics. I'm Marn Frank, if we haven't met, and although I retired from Atlas in 2021, I have not lost my enthusiasm for evidence-based reading instruction, particularly in the component of alphabetics. My co-presenter is Kim Munson, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Munson, and I am an adult education instructor in Faribault Public Schools. I teach a variety of classes. I teach paraprofessional classes, college and career prep academy. I am also a certified food protection manager, and I am a proctor as well. I have also taught ESL, GED classes, and acuplacer classes as well in the past, and I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Kim shares my passion for alphabetics, and so I guess our goal is that we can inspire maybe not the same level of passion, but more passion for alphabetics. We will keep our cameras on and mute and unmute as needed. This makes it more conversational, and we welcome your questions in the chat. Christine will be keeping track of that, and she will be chiming in as needed. The topics for this afternoon are to talk about some evidence for teaching alphabetics across levels. We're not going to overload you with evidence, but I think it's important that you know there is support for teaching this reading component. Then we'll look at a variety of routines that were developed by many teachers and fit across levels. There's also a resource I'll share with you that was developed by STAR EBRI teachers over the years. It lists recommended materials, tried and true, according to each component. So it's a wealth of resources. I pretty much can assure you, if you are interested in adding alphabetics to your instruction, you do not have to recreate any wheels. There's a lot of online and print resources for you to access. And then we'll conclude with asking a question about successes, challenges, and perhaps offering some solutions. Quick reminder that after today's webinar, there are 3 more. In 2 weeks, we'll talk about vocabulary. So alphabetics and vocabulary are the word skills. We'll cover those first. And then in April and May, the webinars are about fluency and comprehension, which are the text skills. A quick reminder that an important resource or set of resources for you to access is the participant folder. So here's a look at it. It's in alphabetical order, so you can see that the first 2 are about alphabetics, challenges, and solutions. Scrolling down, we cover the other components. Instructional orders right here is something I'll share a screenshot for, but that's a valuable list for you to take a look at. Then we have CCRS standards that include alphabetics, and that's about it. But there are over 30 resources in this folder that are there for you and for you to share with other teachers that align with 1 or more of the webinars. The first resource that I'm sharing with you, and I'm presenting these in chronological order, is this textbook right here called Improving Adult Literacy Instruction from 2012. This is a very deep resource. It took me all summer to read it, but the special feature of it is that it was one of the first resources to address ELL reading populations and needs. I'm going to read this quote to you so that it can sink in more easily. For those adults who need to develop their word reading skills, it may be important to teach word attack strategies with particular attention to challenges posed by multisyllabic words and variable vowel pronunciations, of which there are many in the English language. Effective word attack strategies for all readers include phonological decoding or segmenting and blending, word identification by analogy, peeling off or chunking prefixes and suffixes, and facility with variable vowel pronunciation. And we'll give you resources for all of these. So again, be assured you don't have to recreate any wheels. The second is from 2013 when the Common Core state standards came out, and then they were followed by the college and career readiness standards. And these standards affirmed the value of alphabetics from very, very basic levels all the way through multisyllable decoding. So RF1, which is actually from the Common Core standards, talks about understanding the features of print, top to bottom, left to right, the letters, and maybe even their sounds. RF2 talks about phonological awareness, which deals with understanding of spoken, not yet written, words, syllables, and sounds. So those are skills like identifying first sound or last sound, deleting, adding. It's like playing with the language to establish a foundation of understanding. And then RF3 moves into phonics and word recognition, which is your phonics and your word analysis skills. It's identified as K to 5, but we'll soon see from another resource that it can go beyond that. A new term, well, maybe not new, but it's definitely become a buzzword, is structured literacy. Originally, it came from 2014 from the International Dyslexia Association. It's considered an umbrella term that recommends teaching foundational skills through explicit sequential instruction and aligns with the science of reading. There are 6 components, and you can see they are similar to the reading foundational skills, and they're not new to persons trained in EBRI and STAR. The additional part to structured literacy, although we do recommend applying word skills to text, are the components of syntax and semantics. I know both Kim and Christine would like to make a few comments about structured literacy.
Sure, thank you, Marn. I just wanted to comment really briefly. You are indeed correct. This is certainly a buzzword right now in education. And I just, as an educator, I just feel like it's a really exciting time to be in education and to see the ebbs and flows of theory and research, and to be able to modify my instruction and to introduce new research-based strategies to my instruction in the classroom, and to see how that can inform my instruction, and also to see how that moves the needle with students as well. So it can feel a little intimidating, and it is intimidating. And yet at the same time, I think it can certainly really impact students' abilities to be successful with reading and in life. And that's really what I wanted to share about that. So thank you.
Oh, and me, as kind of the person who kind of heads literacy, now that Marn is gone alone, but not alone. I do have a tremendous group of educators on the language and literacy advisory team, otherwise known as LATTE. We're going to be taking applications for new members. So make sure you check out the Atlas website. And yes, we're hearing a lot about structured literacy and the science of reading. It is a super buzz. And being a longtime reading person myself, but not an expert in phonics, that's why I'm very excited to have Marn and Kim here today. But this is not new research. This research has been around for some time, and we are definitely digging back into it again. And our goal is to just relook at research, some of which we may not have considered for a while, some which is newer, and really compare it to how we're doing professional development in reading instruction, and evolve as we need to evolve. I was just saying, and I love Kim's attitude captures it beautifully, that I encourage, I can never be so married to a way of doing something that I'm not willing to be open-minded and look at new ways. And there is nothing here that I see that is in conflict with the college and career readiness standards, with EBRI, with STAR, and even some of the pieces, some of the metacognitive pieces, definitely we touch on in our ACEs TIF. So I think we already have great pieces, and we will just continue to develop and pay attention to the research and to people like Kim, who are really in the middle of it.
Thank you both. Okay, there we go. This continuum, I have found to be so helpful. It's from this book, and Christine, if you could put the title in the chat box. Unlocking Literacy, Effective Decoding and Spelling Instruction, by Dr. Marcia K. Henry. I use this book so frequently when I was working for Atlas and developing resources. And one of my favorite pieces was this continuum. So what she did is she outlined the alphabetic skills that can be taught, should be taught across levels. So again, at very early basic levels, you have that phonological awareness. Then either simultaneously or shortly after, you move into Roman alphabet letter names, forms, and sounds. The 26 single consonants and vowels. And then when students have mastery of that, you move into the many other consonants and vowel sounds, those variable vowel sounds, and some variable consonant sounds too. At about grade level 3, students might be ready for compounds, then syllables, prefixes, and suffixes. Prefixes and suffixes together are called affixes. In more intermediate levels, rather than beginning, students might be ready for Latin roots, which are the foundation of many, many academic words. And then when instruction becomes maybe more subject-based, then they need Greek combining forms, which are like roots. They form many scientific and mathematical words. And then along the way, you are reviewing any previous patterns that tend to pop up. So I think what this demonstrates is that we, as proficient readers, we learned a lot about alphabetics throughout our school years. It wasn't just in the early grades. It's 8 to 9 years, or can be 8 to 9 years of instruction. So when students have alphabetics needs, it's not a quick fix. It needs to be systematic and sequential and across years. And if you're wondering where to start along that long and wide continuum, remember from last week that conducting the word reading test gives you an alphabetics mastery level. So that level determines who needs alphabetics and approximately at what levels. So grade equivalent 1 to 3 from that test indicates beginning level and phonics needs. 4 to 7 indicates intermediate or advanced and readiness for multisyllable. And then 8 plus means they probably don't need regular instruction, but they may need incidental instruction when difficult words arise and it's worth your time to break them or chunk them into those decodable parts. This is a screenshot of a wonderful order, again, from Marcia K. Henry. She calls it a logical order. Last week, we talked about the Sylvia Green for identifying unknown and known letter sound patterns. That's also a wonderful order. I think what's special about Dr. Henry's is that she's chosen to use a similar order of patterns, but then the instructional orders go from common to less common, from regular to irregular, and from predictable to less predictable. So looking at single consonants and short vowels, she groups them from predictable to less predictable. So your first set when teaching single consonants and short vowels might be M, L, S, T, and A, because those sound the same and work the same. There's no tricks to those 5 letter sound patterns.
Marn, can I just say something?
Absolutely.
About the previous slide? When I was kind of first journeying into the world of phonics and alphabetics, thankfully we had Atlas, which is such a tremendous resource for us, right? Just trying to find where to begin. Identifying a resource like this is so helpful, because then at least you know where to start, right? And then finding an ancillary resource to support your instruction is then where you kind of go from there. So whatever you select, if this is where you go or where you land, is perfect. I like how you are sharing a couple different resources, and then once you identify that, then you can start looking at, okay, now how am I going to teach the material? So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I think what makes alphabetics puzzling is we don't remember how we learn to read. It's so internalized that to go back and be comfortable with an order or a sequence is really challenging. So to have this in front of you really helps, along with the word reading test or the Sylvia Green. And it's flexible, so it gives you, again, a starting point, but you can always move forward or backward based on your instructional assessment, what you observe when teaching students. I'm going to walk through the evidence-based phonics practices. These would be ideal, and as I've mentioned at previous webinars, we recognize that our adult ed situations are not always ideal for best practice instruction. Students don't have to be there. They often have barriers to being there regularly. So these are ideal, but then soon after, we will present more real routines that were developed by ABE teachers. So the first step is to select a set of unknown letter names, letter sound, or word patterns for individual, small, or large group lessons, depending on the level you teach and the needs within that level. When you're teaching phonics, you need to do a lot of modeling. So you will model saying each letter name, letter sound, or word pattern several times. Students need to see, visually, hear, auditorily, and then say each pattern. That's a multi-sensory method that gets whatever pattern you're teaching into their brain for retrieval, memory and retrieval. And then you shift to guiding, repeated naming or reading, and present for writing or spelling, which is the kinesthetic or tactile. That further helps with that memory and retrieval. And then it's always important to do some sort of activity that applies these taught word skills to text. So it could be finding the taught letters in text, or it could be modeling guiding of phrases, sentences, or paragraphs. And if you're using phrases, sentence, or paragraphs, they will also have sight words. And we'll talk about an evidence-based sight word routine later on. Okay, let's take a break and do a chat call. There are 2 within this webinar. So pick one of these sentence stems and please put some sort of response, if you're comfortable with that, in the chat. So I hope you're able to see these. Laurie Weeks mentioned something about using Orton Gillingham. That is definitely an evidence-based approach. Heather mentions interest in structured literacy. So as Christine said, that's to come. Tamara appreciates the order. Michelle, the many approaches to evidence-based reading instruction. Mike, yeah, I love that predictable to less predictable. Again, we don't remember what is because it's internalized. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just agreeing. Yep, absolutely.
Another mention of order, structure. Yes, in time. Time will always be a challenge. Okay. These are great. Kim agrees, these are great. The idea of sentence starters came from Christine, and they're working wonderfully in these webinars. The responses that people are sharing are just so much deeper than when we simply ask, do you have any questions? Do you have any comments? So yeah, if you haven't used sentence starters in your instruction, it's working for these webinars. Did I miss any?
Looking good, Marn.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm going to turn over to Kim.
Okay.
She will share her practitioner voice in terms of the slides we presented so far.
Sure. Well, thank you, Marn. Okay, so as I was thinking about what I would share today, the first thing that came to mind, and as I was reading the responses, so much resonated with me. In fact, just as a practitioner, one thing that I really struggled with is just finding a resource, one resource that really could help me encompass as many of these parts as possible, because planning time is very little, right? And I don't have just an overabundance of extra time to be pulling resources. And so one resource that I have found incredibly helpful is UFLI Foundations. It comes out of the University of Florida, and it's relatively new. I asked my administrator if she would purchase it for me. I think it's $70, and it is incredible. I learned of this resource from a Facebook group of like-minded teachers in the area of reading, if you will. And it really encompasses a lot of these areas of alphabetics, right? Everything we're kind of talking about is on 2 pages, and it goes from the very beginning of reading instruction all the way up to what Marn was kind of alluding to, Greek and Latin roots, and we're talking about affixes and prefixes, suffixes, etc. But I really like it because it's just one book and it has everything. And if we need to get very explicit for me as a teacher, it even has a paragraph that I can share. So I can actually read from the book if I need to. And if I'm feeling really uncomfortable and and I'm not very familiar with it, then I have that available to me. So I can actually read from the book. So my first recommendation, as some people were talking about, is just find that resource or resources that will help you. First, find the sequence that you're going to use, and then find the resources. For me, it was this. I really appreciate this. And then when it comes to really practical in-class activities, what I have found very useful, I always start out with the phonemic awareness activity. And I didn't always do that, just to be honest with you. It has only been in the last couple of years that I have started to recognize how important phonemic awareness is for students. I have read some research that suggests that phonemic awareness, the lack of phonemic awareness will greatly inhibit a student's ability to read later in life. So we want to make sure they can really be able to manipulate sounds, and we can do that really easily in the classroom. And you don't even really need to have anything to do that. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. So for example, a phonemic awareness activity, you can do this through alliteration, you can read story, different types of stories, things like that. But you could even just say, let's just break apart, do some chunking or segmenting of words, and let's just share the word, or let's just use the word cat. And I like to use my fist, and I'll say, let's just sound out the word cat, and we'll use our fingers to point, like to identify the sounds, because we're manipulating sounds in the word cat. Cat. And I will do that with this series of words that are associated with the particular lesson that we're talking about for the day. I really like things like that for just that short phonemic awareness exercise. I also will use chips. I will, let's say if we're talking about short E or digraphs or whatever. I'll just give them, let's say 5 chips. And as we're sounding out words, and I'll just say, move the chip every time you hear a different sound. And let's say the word is, I don't know, chip. And I don't care if they know if it's SHIP or CHIP. We're just looking at sounds. So it's sh, if that makes sense. Because again, being able to recognize the sound in words is really important. And again, I never really used to do that, but I have started to do that more and more. Another way you can do that is using pop-its. Even adults, even I love to just mess with pop-its, but I happen to be like a high energy person, so I need to release my energy. But adult learners love this stuff. I actually, in my program, work with a lot of young adults, students who even just graduated high school. So don't underestimate just, things like this. Adults like these just as much as kids. So after I get a short phonemic awareness activity out of the way, then we're going to introduce our new activity. And again, this is why I love UFLI. For instance, today we're going to introduce our new concept. Let's say it's going to be the letter A. And I will talk about that specific letter, right? What is this letter? It's the letter A. A is a vowel, right? And A is a continuous sound. I'll model this. And I know Marn mentioned that, especially for our multilingual learners, that ability to model this is so important. I noticed somebody in the chat talking about the importance of modeling the correct sound is so important. So I'll model that, which kind of leads me to the next point, which I think early in my practice, and I kind of mentioned it later on in this webinar, the journey is so slow, right? Some of the things I've discovered over the years, I don't think at one time I appreciated the importance of really articulating the sounds as I do now. Now I'm much more, I don't want to say obnoxious, but I really want students to understand the importance of how do you make the sound with your mouth. In fact, on YouTube, there are ESL teachers that have videos on every sound, and you can have them watch the videos or you can do it yourself. But showing the articulatory gestures is very important. And I'll show you a sound wall in a subsequent chart. And then after we talk about that new concept, whatever we're talking about for the day, the sound, and I'll just isolate the sound. For instance, letter A has 3 sounds, but we're going to talk just about short A. Then we'll go on and talk about letter formation, the importance of, okay, this is how we form the letter, uppercase, lowercase, etc. And then we'll do some word work. It doesn't necessarily have to be very long. Marn will talk about it later, so I don't want to go too deeply into it. But word work, one thing that I have also liked is something called word chaining. And again, that's not something I used to do. This is something that I learned about within the last year from just some exploration that I have done. And I'll kind of give you an example of it. And again, this is from UFLI, but I learned about it from a class that I took. It could be as simple as fat, sat, sap, map, and tap. And again, you're just slightly manipulating sounds for students to recognize those phonemes and words. And for students to be able to master those sounds and recognize them is so incredibly rewarding for them. And it's so fun to see that. And that can be really exciting for them and just for me to see that too. So then, I kind of shared that in the next bullet, word chains, and then decodable texts. There are a few websites because of COVID that have free decodable texts available still, where you can actually read them online. You don't need a subscription or anything like that. My program, we have hundreds of level text. So, I mean, I don't want those to go to waste. So, I still use those. Not going to lie, but decodable text is a great resource because then you can actually practice the material that you're teaching in class. So that's when I can whip out some decodable text. I have purchased some myself that I have used for my own family, but also that I can use in class. And then lastly, I know Marn will talk about this. I think it's in the presentation. I don't think we can underestimate the need for introducing high frequency words, because those are just like the best bang for your buck, right? Because those are the most frequently used words in the English alphabet. So spending time, if you can, in instruction, just talking about Dulce and Fry is important. And again, not that I'm at all biased or anything, but UFLI has that in every lesson. And that's why I really like this particular book. So that's just kind of an example of how I tackle it. In my class, just to be perfectly honest, I only tutor very small groups of students, just based on my program and where I teach in a rural setting. But that is how I would, or how I approach phonics instruction in my class. And Marn, can you just go to the next slide just to show a couple of things? So when we talk about word chaining, this is an example, and I'm sorry it's really small, but word chaining, it's for phonemic manipulation and to really help students understand or see how the interchange of letters are in words. And like for instance, and I'm sorry, it's hard for me to see, I don't have my glasses on, I should have put them on. When you do any word chaining activity, the key is you only want to replace one letter at a time. And you can do that fairly early in phonics instruction, right? Probably after maybe lesson 10, after they're starting to master some of those early letters. And a lot of these words are high frequency words too. And so they're going to start seeing success reading and reading longer chains of words at the same time. So you can Google word chains and just print them on strips of paper for students to read. And then can you just go to the next slide for me too, Marn? Okay, so sound wall. I think I mentioned this in my first slide. I do not have a sound wall yet, but this is my to-do list. Like, I want a sound wall in my classroom. It is a bit of investment. I think it's like $100, but I've been going through training for the last couple of years, and I have just kind of come to appreciate more and more this insistence, like really showing students how to articulate sounds. And as I mentioned, I really didn't understand that before. And so there are so many different resources for showing that, and a sound wall is one. And I just thought, oh, wouldn't that be awesome to have in the classroom? And as you're actually sharing how to do that, or how to say these sounds, to actually have pictures on the wall and things like that. So anyway, I just wanted to show that this is something you might want to pursue, but there is a little bit of a financial investment. I don't know if you can find any free resources for that. If anybody has an idea, please let me know. But thank you. Tamara, about the decodable text, I'll find the links and I'll put them in here for you. Yeah. You do feel when you are doing when you are enunciating and things like that, it can feel a little obnoxious, or you feel a little awkward doing it, but I can't tell you how important it is. And what I've kind of learned from research too is that so many letter sounds like B and P, you turn your voice box on for one and not the other, for instance. So when it comes to spelling, it can be really important for students to understand why enunciation is so important. And so just taking another 5 minutes of time to really share with students why or how to articulate those sounds properly is important, because where we place our tongue, how we engage our voice box with sounds is really important. And by no means am I an expert with all this, but I really feel like research suggests we should. And especially as we kind of move further into like the spelling piece of it, it makes a lot of sense to me. But I'll get those links to the decodables now.
Thank you, Kim. This next routine is something I observed Chris Kloss teaching a number of years ago to early literacy students. And It's about teaching those print concepts combined with the alphabet. So the first thing she does with those 26 letters is she writes or shows the taught letters from previous lessons. And you can do it as lower, upper, or both cases. So she's reviewing what's been taught, and she has students name them, or she names them and they write them. So that idea of reviewing what was taught at the beginning of the next lesson is really important. And it can be visual or auditory. And then she moved into a new set of letters, or maybe just one at a time. And she wrote them across the board a number of times from left to right, demonstrating that left to right of reading English. And she said the names more than once. I don't recall that she was introducing the sounds, but you could do that. That would be a combination of RF1 and RF2, and even RF3. Then she guided students saying of those new letter names, writing or tracing them on alphabet strips or flashcards. And alphabet flashcards are very easy to find online to print. And then, in consideration of that important step to link words with text or letters with text, then she presented a text they had read together, and she had students find those new letters within that text to kind of reinforce the purpose. We're learning this because it is about reading. The second routine came from a webinar I attended presented by Andrea Eckelberger. And so this was designed for beginning ELLs. So she starts with a simple whole story that has pictures or photos, and that's considered emergent text. She read the story to and with students more than once. She selected the phonemic awareness or phonics instruction driven by the content. So whatever appeared frequently in the content is what she chose to teach. Could be consonants, vowels, word endings, word families, key or sight words. Key meaning used frequently. Then they practiced those phonological awareness skills through spoken language. And then they returned to the text for some comprehension activities. So it really encompasses a number of alphabetic skills in addition to fluency and comprehension. The most popular phonics model is called synthetic, and this combines parts to wholes. So here are those first letters from Marcia K. Henry's sequence. So you would, like Kim mentioned, this is the letter M. The students would repeat. It makes the sound. And you want to avoid saying the M sound. You want to make it a short, clipped modeling of the sound. Then you would do a quick, what do you hear at the beginning of teacher? What do you hear at the beginning of student? What do you hear at the end of student? And that doesn't have to be written, that can be oral. And this would happen over multiple days. This wouldn't be a whole lesson. Phonics is best delivered in short but regular lessons. So maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Then you would move into the decoding, creating words that use those 5 sounds. And it is a limited set at this point. But once you start adding other letter sound patterns, then your word lists and your phrase sentence possibilities explode. Try not to get caught up in the meanings of words with students, but rather focus on the blending and the segmenting. When you move to text, it's probably necessary that you teach some sight words, because again, those are what make up sensible phrases and sentences. So simple ones would be Al and Sam sat, Sam and Sal sat, Sam, Sal, and Al sat. Again, not the most interesting sentences, but this is just the beginning of the sequence. I recently tutored a very reluctant emerging reader. He wanted activity, he wanted manipulation, he wanted kinesthetic and tactile. So I really learned the value of sound cards, and you can download and print them for free from sightwords.com, one of the many sites to find sound cards. And so I would do the same process, but using cards. And then he would be able to move those around and form the words. A second model is analogy phonics. And if this is of interest to you, you do not have to go out and create your own resources. I created teaching analogy phonics several years ago for Atlas, and it's available on the Atlas website. This is comparing parts to wholes. And for some students, it's easier to learn phonics with decodable chunks. Research says our brains remember and store decodable chunks or words more easily. And this would be the concept of onsets and rhymes or word families. So one of the first would be AB. You would introduce it as this first word part is spelled AB and it sounds AB. And then you would add consonants in front, either single consonants or consonant digraphs to form other words. Again, in order to move on to phrases and sentences, you'll have to teach or review some sight words. You can see that the sentences are a little more interesting because of the larger word list. But yeah, this is an alternative that I think has especially been proven to be successful with English language learners and students who've already spent a lot of time with synthetic. A third model is analytical phonics, which is separating wholes to parts. This is the Words Their Way series, which has numerous workbooks that you can copy, print and copy. And there has to be some foundation of letter sound knowledge in order for analytical to work. It's word sorting. So you would give students this chart and they would have to cut it up into small flashcards. Cat, cake, and oddball are your headers. And so you would walk through that cat has the short A sound, cake has the long A sound with the silent E at the end, and then oddball words are presented just as kind of a challenge because they don't fit either pattern. And then you would model sorting these words and your thinking process as to why you put them under the cat, cake, or oddball header. This is the routine for teaching sight or instant words. So Dolch site or Fry instant, and those word lists are very, very accessible. In fact, probably the easiest place to find them is citewords.com. It's important to explain in whatever language students can understand that these words are used frequently in text, short and long, and they need to be known well, automatically. Analyze them. Some do follow the rules, some don't. Most of the words that don't follow the rules begin or end correctly. I'm thinking of the word the. So it begins with the TH, but the E at the end is not an E sound. Talk about their meaning, if they have meaning. If they don't, their usage. And then, like with the regular letter sound patterns or any letter sound pattern sequence, make it multi-sensory: seeing, hearing, saying, tracing, and spelling. The final routine is what I call blended, and I came up with this for a beginning level child reader who had been struggling with letters and sounds for years, and she just really wanted to be reading. So I selected easier texts. I looked for a pattern that appeared frequently within that text. For example, ice was in a story. I can't remember the topic, but it was a pattern that appeared more than once in the text. That was my base for creating a word family of 10 to 12 words. I modeled the segmenting and blending of those words. I used them in sentences, and then she reread and spelled them multiple times. And then we transitioned to the fluency. I had her find all of the ice words, and then we read and reread. And by the end, she was so proud that she could read a short passage. This is not ideal, but it was real for the situation of a struggling reader. I only saw her 2 hours a week, and she came after school, so she was tired. So as you can see, there are many resources, there are many routines for you to pick from. So with that in mind, before we take our break, we're going to do a quick poll. So considering all that I went through probably too quickly, let's take a moment to ask which of them, and Christine, they can answer more than one, correct?
That is correct.
Are most real for your classroom?
You should see the poll now.
I do.
Great. Waiting for a couple more. All right, here you go.
Well, it's not like there's a winner, because you could pick more than one answer. But I'm glad to see the interest in at least one of these routines. And think too about combining them. Just because you pick one doesn't mean you can't bring in another. Like the analytical is a good way to review 2 or 3 sounds. So you can combine them, which jazzes things up a little for students and maybe for you. So thank you for your responses. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we will shift into multi-syllable best practices and routines. So I will walk you through the evidence-based multisyllabic practices. Similar to phonics, you will select 1 to 2 new word parts. And at this point, it would be syllable types and rules. Prefixes, you can focus on just the common, same for roots and suffixes. And it can be taught individually in small or large groups. Modeling is still important for each word part, pronunciation, spelling, and meaning. Now, syllables don't have meaning, but Latin roots and Greek forms carry meaning. So it's important for those to talk about meaning. And then you will model and guide reading familiar words with those patterns, more everyday basic words in chunks and wholes. And you can be tapping or counting those chunks. And that skill of chunking is essential for multisyllabic decoding. And it also really helps with encoding or spelling. If you're working with roots and forms, you'll also help them make meaning with those parts. And again, turn it around and present for spelling. You'll repeat step 3 for less familiar and more academic words, if students can handle them. But you don't have to go to less familiar. You can just teach the familiar. And then, as mentioned before, apply those top word skills to text. For multisyllabic or syllable words, your selected texts don't have to include what you've just taught. They can be texts with any longer words, because that still gives them practice with applying what they've learned to those words. The more common routine for teaching longer words is disassembly. And that means taking apart or unbuilding whole words into word parts. MegaWords is a resource that is on the chart coming up, and that has been a favorite of Star and EBRI teachers for years. And MegaWords pretty much gives you everything you need to teach the 6 syllable types and the 5 rules. The closed syllable is the most common syllable in the English language. So this is what you would share about closed syllables. They have 1 vowel, and they always end and often begin in a consonant. The vowel has a short sound, and when you see closed syllables, you divide them between the middle consonants. Most words have at least 1 closed syllable. You can present compounds such as Batman, instep, upset to begin with, where clearly the separation is between the consonants and between the words. And then you can transition to words that don't have that compounding, but they do have decodable word parts. Absent. So ab by itself is not a word. Contest. Dentist. 100. Napkin. Until. The words with the asterisks refer to when schwa gets involved. So, and this could be more than your students can handle, but you decide. In the second syllable, second closed syllable of a number of words, the schwa sound is heard, the but not spelled with U. So in gallon, it's spelled with O, in problem, it's spelled with E, and in lesson, it's spelled with O. Again, you would present them visually, auditorily, for reading, and for spelling. Other resources that match with the disassembly are making sense of decoding and spelling. And that literally is a scripted curriculum. And you'll be able to link to that in the resource chart. So that one also was popular amongst STAR and EBRI teachers.
And Marn, if I could clarify, that resource is free.
Yes. Yes, whereas MegaWords you have to purchase. But you could also check your bookshelves because we handed out many, many copies of MegaWords to STAR teachers. So check your bookshelves before you purchase MegaWords, or ask teachers who've been STAR trained in your program if they know who that resource is. What we handed out to teachers was, I believe, just books 1 and 2. Book 1 being syllable types and rules, and book 2 being suffixes and prefixes. During the pandemic, when it was impossible to teach or challenging to teach with print materials, I created e-alphabetics, which is sets of slides for teaching the 8 most common suffixes and prefixes. There's also a set of lessons on compounds. This is a sample of what the lessons look like for ABLE and IBLE. ABLE pronounced ABLE, IBLE pronounced IBLE. One of the first slides, in case this is new for students, because you don't have to go in their order of frequency or commonality, is an explanation of what suffixes are and what suffixes can do and how they can help. So often being a better speller is a motivator for students. So explaining that learning suffixes will help with their spelling might get the buy-in you need. They also, of course, help with reading longer words and then recognizing those words within their spoken language according to what they've heard or already know. The next slide specifically explains the suffix or suffix set. Let you take a look at that yourself. Notice that ABLE or ABLE forms more familiar words, and IBLE is added to more academic words. I learned so much doing this resource. I thought I had a good handle on suffixes and prefixes, but there was a lot I did not know. And of course, my teacher was Marcia K. Henry, because one of the many lists she has is of the suffixes and prefixes and this type of information as to what happens when you add them to base or root words. These are the word lists that are within the slides. So I show the chunking of the word and then the meaning and then some examples. The second model or routine is called assembly. It's not used as frequently as disassembly. And that's partially because it moves into Latin roots or Greek forms. So if students aren't quite ready for that level of decoding, then this would not be appropriate. So instead of taking apart, you're building the parts into wholes. So this is a matrix. In the middle is the Latin root rupt. So you would teach that first. You would teach the pronunciation, the spelling, and the meaning. And then if you want, you can explain that it's bound rather than free. Bound meaning it has meaning, but it can't stand alone. So it has to be assembled with prefixes in order to make real words. Free roots can stand alone. There are more bound than free roots.
Marn, with this, oh, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when I see this, I could definitely see maybe a placemat on a table. We could do some manipulation with some of these parts. And I think it could be a really fun hands-on activity too.
Right, because especially for the suffixes, you would be reusing the suffix cards. And you would be reusing the prefix cards too. So, yeah. And then what you model from left to right is adding dis, and you would model the pronunciation and tell the meaning, to rupt, inter with rupt, and e with rupt. So you would start just by adding the prefix. And then if students can handle it, you would then model adding the prefix, the root, with a suffix. So it can get wordy fast. So how much you present and at what pace is up to you. And again, this is not a one-shot lesson. This is over multiple lessons with context being given or shared throughout. You don't have to create an assembly resource. Morpheme matrices is something I created before I left Atlas. And you can find that on the Atlas website.
And Marn, just so you know, as you're mentioning things like your e-alphabetics and the analogy phonics and the morpheme matrices, if people aren't looking at their chat box, I am dropping links to those.
Thank you.
As you're talking.
Thank you. And they will be also in the resource chart. So here's a sample of all the words that you can assemble with rupt and those prefixes and suffixes. So this is sequential in that you're starting with more basic words, and then if students can manage it, moving into less familiar, definitely academic words. This routine is something that I've been using with 2 intermediate level students. Again, I only see them 2 hours a week after school. It's not necessarily ideal, but it works for us. I wish I could figure out a way to spend more time with the vocabulary. I'm not seeing a lot of retention, although we go over the words. We stop and take a break and go over the words once a month. So, like my blended routine for beginning level, I select a text at an approximate or appropriate grade and lexile level. I have used ReadWorks. I have used News ELA, and Christine has convinced me to also add on Common Lit because they are more academic. I get into the text and I choose 5 to 6 academic vocabulary words or other multisyllable words that appear several times in the text and are essential for understanding. So those would be keywords. I model the chunking, the pronunciation, the meaning, and we use them in oral and written sentences. I've really seen both of these students make excellent progress in chunking. In fact, sometimes what they come up with, which is correct right away, is so amazing. As many times as we can, we read them, they find them. It's not the optimal number of exposures, but it's definitely more than once. And then we transition to the fluency where I model the text and then we read it together or they read it alone. And I ask questions or we do comprehension charts or we write about the text as much as I can squeeze in to those 2 hours. Okay, Kim has some final thoughts as the practitioner.
Yes, thank you, Marn. So just as we're kind of wrapping up here soon, I wanted to just share some final thoughts. As I am making lesson plans and as I am strategizing with students, particularly if perhaps a student isn't making gains or maybe struggling in class, one thing I always just keep in mind is, according to research, we know that 95% of students have the ability to learn to read. And so if there's something that's not working, I always have to go back to, what is my strategy like? Am I not placing the student in the appropriate level? Do I have to go back somewhere? Like where am I missing something? Because we know that students have the ability to learn to read. Like, there's something missing. And so it really challenges me as a practitioner to figure it out. It's like a Tetris puzzle, right? I got to figure something out here. And so it's encouraging to know that that students do have the ability to read, and we have to kind of get all those tools in our toolboxes. There's so much available. Going to the Atlas website is such a great resource for us, and we have such a tremendous amount of professionals in our state who are here to support each other. I feel so supported as a teacher in this state. It's really awesome. The other thing I wanted to just comment on is that I feel like there's this misnomer with alphabetics that it's super boring and that students don't really appreciate it or they think it's childish. And I just really have to push back on that because I think it is really exciting and fun. I think that students enjoy it, our adult students can enjoy it. And sometimes we have to get creative, but I think it is exciting for them. I think they see the fruits of their labor quite well. I'm not saying it doesn't take time, because it does. It's a multi-year process. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it, but they can start to see progress relatively quickly, even if it's with really short sentences, if they're struggling readers or if they are new immigrants or whatever it might be. But for students to be able to see success, hopefully that will encourage them to continue in this process, because we want our students to be literate, right? We want them to be able to participate in society to the fullest extent. And that's where we come in here as educators. And another comment I wanted to make that I really had to just hammer into my own brain is that we cannot skip the foundation of reading instruction, phonics specifically. Students will suffer. I think there have been times, and just being totally transparent here, a student comes in, you know, we have so many priorities as adult education instructors, there's just never enough time. And I'm like, oh, you know, they scored XYZ on their TABE test or their CASAS. Are they fine? You know, like there's this question, there's this battle we have, but are they fine? Will they be fine? Can we skip phonics, right? Or can we skip some of these foundational steps when we know, our end result is ultimately comprehension? Can they really comprehend to the fullest extent if they are not able to decode appropriately? And I would argue they probably can't. And so I think what I've come to really appreciate is that, yes, we do have to take a step back and lay some foundation, but at the end of the day, we are going to give them so much more at the end of their journey. And so that is just really something that I have kind of had to struggle with, especially because we know so many of our students have so many priorities. They have families, they are working multiple jobs, they might be working at night. I mean, and this isn't a fast process for a lot of our students. So trying to get that buy-in sometimes can be hard, but I don't think we can skip the foundation, like just laying down some foundation here. And the last thing I just wanted to comment on is that you may be here and be like, whoa, this is so much. I don't know if I can handle this. But, for me, I was introduced to evidence-based reading back in 2014. That's when I became a STAR student. And this process has been so slow for me. And every year I add just a little bit more and I learn a little bit more. And then I might add a few more pieces to my practice as a teacher. And then I learn a little bit more. And so if I could encourage you to just maybe take a couple ideas from this webinar to add to your practice, know that you are doing right by your students. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes quite a long time. And I just think this has been this has been 9 years for me, and I'm still learning. And every year I feel like I want to do more with my classroom and my instruction. And I imagine in 10 years it will look even vastly different than now. So just know that it is a slow process. And as Christine was mentioning at the very beginning, there's so much change happening in general in our profession that I imagine it will look a lot different. So thank you.
I'm going to say a final thought, and then I there is a question. I don't know if it's been answered, Mike's question. And yes, absolutely agree. I think that I myself have seen the result of students not receiving adequate phonics instruction, and it can really slow them down as far as being able to make reading gains. One reminder, though, is that I always make or that I always give is to make sure, though, that we don't separate some pieces. When we talk about foundational skills and then meaning making skills, we need a strong foundation, but it's not something where students are just working on phonics and then mastering that, and then they move on, right, to doing some comprehension and some of those pieces. It may not be formal, right? But even if we think about kindergarten students, I was just talking about this in a webinar I did this morning. They're, of course, working, really hard on their foundational skills. But then the student, for example, is reading aloud and they're looking at the cover and they're making predictions, and the teacher is stopping and asking them informal comprehension questions. So, and we know that that's what students need to stay engaged. And we know this is a need. We're seeing phonics as a need on a lot of evaluations, and we are definitely, we are moving it up to a priority area. So please stay tuned, because we know there's a lot of great things to come. And again, we hit this hard at one point, and it seems to be time for a resurgence. So I'm really very, very excited. This webinar has been awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Kim, for reinforcing take small steps, because that's pretty much the expectation of these webinars is we throw a lot at you, too much, but please don't feel overwhelmed. Do what you can. That's the reality. Mike asked an excellent question about the syllable rules. They are intended to be flexible. So there isn't one way to divide syllables. The division controls shorter, long sounds. But yeah, if a student decides to divide between the consonants or after the double consonants, if they can come up with the pronunciation, that is the ultimate purpose. So try not to get into right or wrong, because again, the chunking is what's most important. Chunking to pronounce and make meaning.
And Marn was right. For anyone who says, I can't do syllable types in a GED classroom, that's too high. Oh, I've done it with GED students many, many times. And I come at it with spelling, but also as we practice syllable types or a particular syllable type, I get some multi-syllable words that really use that syllable type in front of them so they can see within a short period of time. They may not have mastered that syllable type, but they can see the application and they can all of a sudden read a multi-syllable word. I have not found syllable types in the GED classroom for students who need it a hard sell at all. And in fact, I would say that many of our students who get a 9th through 12th grade level on a TABE or a CASAS goals are in serious need of work still with multiple syllable words. I think that slows them down, and that may add to them taking longer time to read, which can impact them on tests such as the GED or on the post test that we give.
This is the resource chart I've been mentioning. I'll just share the organization with you. I think most of it's self-explanatory. So going across, you have all 4 components. Going down, the order is what's free from Atlas or links, literacy information network communication system. They are hyperlinked, so clicking on them will lead you directly to the resource. Under that is free websites, subscription websites, and print for purchase. So it's a variety of free and paid resources. If you have other ideas, in fact, I intend to add the UFLIIL resource that Kim is so fond of to the list. If you have others, send them our way and we'll see what we can do. Okay, I know we are at 12:30. If you can stay for a moment and select one or both of these sentence stems, we would love to see what you anticipate as a success or challenge. Yay, I see Lori is motivated to teach multi-syllable words. Exactly, that's what happens is readers get stuck. Another word I've heard that I like is stalled. And then teaching alphabetics with GED students. Wow, someone has a success story with mega words. Yeah, some phonics has a childish appearance. But what I've had teachers say is the students don't mind. I mind more than the students about the pictures or the cartoons. They seem to like it. Yes.
These are
Any
also
questions?
awesome. Yeah.
I hope you're still finishing off one of these stems. Please do so. But I did just want to jump in for a moment and thank Marn and Kim. Thank you so much. This is the one that I always listen most closely to of the EBRI. Not that I don't listen to the other ones, Marn, but this is my area where I'm always looking to learn more. And I just some great concrete ideas for how to teach, and sharing your routine, Kim, was really, really helpful. And I just thank you both for this webinar today.
And Mike, you asked the most interesting questions. MegaWords has an entire book on schwa, if you want to know everything about schwa. I don't think you have to. It's just a sound that confuses all of us. It even messes up the number of sounds in English. That's why I have that 44 to 45, because people can't always agree on whether schwa is just a variation of a vowel spelling or a separate sound. But yeah, if you want to go deep, then I don't know what number MegaWords is for schwa. I think it's like 6, 7, or 8. Yay, alphabetics as a priority. And wow, this was exciting to see so many GED teachers jumping on board.
I'm super excited about that.
Yeah. I started STAR when I was a GED teacher back in 2014, so definitely needed. Great.
And this one about a student who doesn't hear the short I. Kim, in our conversation yesterday, you talked about teaching how sounds are formed in the mouth.
Yes.
Maybe that would benefit the student if they could feel the short I.
Right. The articulatory gestures, so actually where in the mouth all the tongue and the teeth, even how far the mouth opens for each sound is really important. I think YouTube really does a nice job. There are some ESL teachers that will have produced videos for most all sounds. And again, there's a sound wall that I know you can purchase, but I would think there would be some free resources too on the internet that show exactly where your tongue should go, your mouth, everything. And if you can demonstrate that you know, because with the tongue in that particular example, you have to kind of push your tongue back a tad. And so that can be difficult, especially for non-native English speakers. So it can be hard.
And have a mirror available.
Oh, yes. I was going to mention that today too. I love that idea. Our program does have a big stash of mirrors, and I think that is such a great idea.
I know Andrea Eckelberger has done things with mirrors.
Yes, that is a great idea.